Hello and welcome back to Regeneration Nation, Costa Rica. I'm your host, Jason Thomas, and I have the pleasure of being with Ian-Michael Hebert of Holos in the Diamante Valley. Right in front of me, I see the Diamante Falls. This place is wonderful. Thank you for joining us today, Ian-Michael.
Really happy to be here.
Right on. Ian-Michael is one of the founders of Holos. He's a steward of healing the interplay between psyche, community, and place. His formal training's been with eco-resort design and counseling psychology, and he's dedicated to restoring humanity's reverence for the living earth. Before coming and starting his work here at Holos, Ian-Michael facilitated the expansion of Esalen Institute in California, as well as Denali Education Center, Chena Hot Springs, and the Center for Ecological Living and Learning. He believes in honoring local and indigenous wisdoms when developing built environments and has demonstrated the capacity to catalyze teams in creating enduring structures and institutions that will benefit generations to come. So, Ian-Michael, you have started something here really big and beautiful. And coming from Esalen, and I'm not actually very familiar with some of these other projects, maybe you can tell us a little bit about them, but what brought you from the States in general to Costa Rica to build this wonderful project?
Thanks for asking. It's great to be here and to share the journey. I think I'm going to go all the way back to when I was 17. I grew up in the middle of Alaska, and my dad was a homesteader, the first backcountry ranger in Denali Park, a home builder. My mom was an artist and teacher, but they were very much back to the land people. So I had a sensibility of living on the land and having a garden and at the time hunting and that kind of thing. And I also had this interest in like the different layers of reality, kind of the more transpersonal realms. So at times when I would like go run in the forest, it wasn't just about like running in the forest, it was about communion with the birch trees and the land. And so I felt this real deep affinity for nature and the natural world, as well as building sustainably in a way that humanity can be in balance with nature. And then after overcoming pretty crippling suicidal depression in my like preteens and teens, through psilocybin and community and just the support of family and friends, I had this realization that I wanted to be a vegetarian or a vegan at the time. And I looked around and it was like, okay, living a vegetarian lifestyle in the middle of Alaska is probably fairly unrealistic from a sustainability standpoint. And like from the vantage point of Alaska, you're kind of like looking at the play of humanity on Earth in the dead of winter and watching it and being like, oh, wow, the majority of humanity does not know how to survive locally. And if there's major shocks to this constructed system that we have of society and economics, if there's a major shock to that, people aren't going to know how to survive. So I was thinking in terms of local economics and local regional sustainability. And I had this insight like, oh, maybe Central America would be a better place for my particular disposition and my dietary choices and all of that. So through a series of serendipities and different things and the loss of a friend, I decided to hitchhike to Central America when I was 18. And I made it partway through Mexico, had a unitive experience with the universe behind a waterfall while I was singing. And then like the really deep need for creating this community or joining a community and farming yams or whatever my fantasy was at that time, it kind of like subsided after this really powerful spiritual experience in the jungle. And then my life took many different like unexpected turns for over a decade. And that included having kids and being a contractor in Alaska and designing homes and writing a degree for my undergraduate degree in eco-resort design and development, being the vice president of a hot springs resort in Alaska where we actually did grow food all the way through the winter and probably could have sustained a vegetarian lifestyle through geothermal hydropower and heat. So I like started to realize, okay, this is like possible up here. So I I raised one kid for many years in Alaska, and then I felt like something was missing as a contractor and as a steward in Alaska. And I moved to San Francisco, did a master's in counseling psychology. I had lost a number of friends at that time to, mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and just felt this real need that I wanted to do my own healing work and understand how I could be of service to people. Because I was so busy as a contractor, I didn't feel like I could give the attention that I wanted to my friends or family. So moved to San Francisco, was remarried, had another child, did grad school, and then I looked around and I was like, oh wow, the economics of this region are such that if I'm in the healing arts, this is going to be really difficult for me. So I decided that I was going to get back into the job world and to be of service with the skills that I had as a contractor and designer and builder. And this really interesting opportunity opened up to be the director of projects for Esalen Institute in Big Sur. So I applied for the job, didn't hear back. And then I contacted them and was like, hey, I know that what you're needing is what I have. So if you'd allow me to come volunteer for a day, I'll just show you what you're needing. So I came and I did that, and I helped them interview a bunch of architects for a rebuild of the campus. And all the architects were like, oh, this is who you need to hire. So I came in and I had the background of psychology, so I really fit within the gestalt of what Esalen is and the history there. And I also had all this experience with building and planning departments. And so I was really fortunate and honored to be a steward of Esalen for 4.5 years. We did $12 million in renovation and new buildings. We renovated a historic building, and there were so many, challenges in that build. We had archaeological remains of the Esalen people. We had endangered species. We had a wild geology. We had all the historic layers, both legally as well as culturally, of everybody's ideas of what Esalen is. So I was able to navigate that really well, and we created a lot of beauty and incorporated sacred geometry and local reused woods and incorporated the Esalen people back into Esalen in other ways. So Esalen Institute is named after the Esalen people. And the Esalen people were the first tribe and linguistic group in the Americas to go culturally extinct, in the sense that they lost their language. So when no one still speaks the language, then a lot of the traditions and a lot of the ways of seeing the world and the cosmology gets lost, because each tradition, each indigenous tradition, has words that mean something that the English language doesn't necessarily translate. So became really good friends with some of the descendants of the Esalen people, and we honored every building at the beginning with their presence and their blessings. And I still have a beautiful redwood table from Little Bear, who's still a brother of mine. He's one of the chiefs or leaders of the Esalen people still. And so I got to really live the dream, the incorporation of culture, sustainability, healing arts, all of these things at Esalen. And when I left, there was this massive void that was left. And I took all the lessons that I had from Esalen, and a few of them were things that I would want to see improved in a healing center. And then I went on a quest. Where else could I bring this knowledge? So I worked a little bit for the Institute of Noetic Sciences, designed a really beautiful building for them, which hasn't been built yet, but incorporated sacred geometry and listening and tuning to the land. I did a little bit of other consulting work. And then coming up to the birth of Holos, there's a gentleman named Stanislav Grof. He was an LSD researcher. He's in his 80s now, and he started holotropic breath work, and he had a dream of a center for transpersonal psychology. And so I came on to just consult his nonprofit pro bono and looked for sites in California, and nothing seemed quite right for what his vision was. But then I got this dream of what if we could work with psychedelics and be in a place where we can really grow our own food, and these components that I really wanted to see alive at Esalen. I was like, okay, well, what if we were to start something new? And the name Holos was a tip of the hat and an honoring of Stan's legacy.
Can you tell us about the name and what it means?
So Stan started holotropic breath work, and holotropic means moving towards wholeness. So holos means wholeness. And he created this whole holotropic paradigm. It's like, what are all the different ways of helping people move towards wholeness? And that can include breath work and psychedelics and yogic practices and all of these different wisdom traditions. So, Holos was meant to be a place where, in the eventuality and the full manifestation of Holos, it's a place where we can realize our wholeness, but also to exhibit what is it already to be in reciprocity with all of life, and to recognize that everything is conscious. And so that's what I really believe is like a synonym with wholeness is like consciousness. So if we realize our own individuated consciousness as separate and like the soul of a human being, that's already complete despite death, birth, challenges. So I wanted to develop a place that represented that and showed what it is to be in reciprocity with other human beings and recognizing them as whole as well as the whole animate world. So that's what inspired this place of Holos. We came on a journey, like myself and a few people that potentially wanted to invest, or people that were involved with Stan's nonprofit. We came to Costa Rica many, many years ago, 6 years ago, and searched all over Costa Rica. Like, where is the place that really spoke to us? And I didn't find a place that in that trip that really was like, oh, this is the place where the manifestation of this vision wants to happen. So we did end up in this valley. We went to Home Farm, which is heaven on Mother Earth, this really sacredly stewarded place that happens to be next door. Mm-hmm. So that's the Baru watershed, and then we're on the Diamante watershed, and those two hug Holos. And so I happened to be in the neighborhood, but I didn't know about this property till years later. So I looked all over Costa Rica on that trip. And what was speaking to me was fresh water, the need for fresh water. And there was something like viscerally in my elemental self and my primal self that was like, we need the right water or the right waterfalls, because this vision that I had, or this powerful experience when I was 18, I like was always called to waterfalls and like flowing water. So, didn't find the right property on that trip. Stan ended up having a stroke, and I kind of set the idea down and was just going back to consulting work. I needed to make a living and raise my kids. And then enough people knew about this dream of Holos that there was like a number of iterations of people that came in, helped move it to a certain stage. And then I was introduced by a friend to the owners of this property, or at least some of these fincas. And I came in and met the people and really thought, oh, this would be the perfect place for Holos. But they already had a vision. They wanted to build a yoga retreat center. And so I proposed, well, why don't I help you with the development of this yoga retreat center? And Holos can be a small part, and we can do medicine work there and that kind of thing. So the pandemic hits, and this is like an important part of the story. I had just started running Holos retreats so that I could gain momentum and interest in what we were doing. The first Holos retreat was on Lake Atitlan. We worked with a couple sacred medicines and with the local people there and Temescal, and had this really beautiful leaders retreat January, a couple days after 2020 started. Then retreat number 2 had been planned for a post-Envision festival retreat, and it was called Living Visions. So we came here to this land because I knew about it, and I thought this would be a really sacred place to do some medicine work, and this valley feels like there's a lot of people that are really turned on. So we stayed at Home Farm. We brought in a Bree elder and his partner and his assistant and his apprentice. We went to the Living Library and worked with Chris and looked at the entheogenic plants there. We visited farms. We locally sourced all the food for the retreat. And this day we had with the Bree elder was really powerful. We did a psilocybin journey. And at the very beginning, we were at one of the little cabins here, and they started preparing the medicine. And the wife of the elder, was a little bit dysregulated, and you could tell that she was unsettled. So we started talking to her, and then all the women in the group like kind of circled her and just held her in her process. And she had never been in a car, didn't speak Spanish. She was still speaking Bri and like their dialect. And so it was like, it retuned me to the sensitivity of how different cultures interact in this place of Costa Rica, and how there are very intact traditions in the indigenous people that are kind of hidden and tucked up in the mountains. Mm-hmm. So we had this beautiful day, beautiful ceremony that day, came back, and that retreat completed in a really, in a great way, in honoring of the land and the people here. And then the third retreat was going to be working with the White Lions in South Africa, which really, they carry these codes of embodied leadership, and we were going to do breath work. So I was headed to go there, and the South African border closes, and COVID's like starting to really pick up. So, and all the shutdowns. So I checked in with my daughters and their moms, and I was like, hey, there's this property in Costa Rica that I feel like would be a really good thing for me to tune into and spend some time with the local people and feel the land, because I really want to be part of this development project. And so they were both like, okay, we're stable. Like, let's ride this out and see what happens. So I flew down. 2 days later, the borders closed to Costa Rica, and like they basically shuttered the airport. I went there at one point, and it was actually shuttered. So I ended up spending the subsequent 3 months here living in a little cabin with bats, and it was like a real initiation into this place. And I got to know the local people and hiked to the top of the 600-foot waterfall and slept on the edge of the cliffs. And just like, I started tuning, what does this land want and what does it need, and who are the local caretakers that have been here for 20 years, Katia and Domingo, and generations back, and got to know who the stewards of this valley were. And I thought, like, okay, I've done a really good job of my homework, met a landowner right next door, and I knew that this house really should be part of the whole development because it's very prominent. Asked him if he would sell it. It was mid-pandemic. I bought this house with, actually, it wasn't that simple. I was totally out of money trying to build like the momentum for Holos and find investors. So I called my folks and I was like, hey, there's this house that I can buy. It's pretty inexpensive. He'll owner finance part of it. Can I just borrow some money to like get this grounded? And my dad was like, no, I don't know about this idea. And my mom was like, my mom and stepdad were like, okay, yeah, we'll loan you some money. So borrowed money from my mom, owner financed this house, went and checked on my kids, and like looked in BC for another site for a Holo site, because we have intentions to eventually have a node in BC and the States. Okay. And so that's like, we've got still a lot of work to do here, but we continue to scout up there. So went and did these adventures in the States, and then I moved back here, and I'm moving into my house. I have no furniture, like not really any resources left. And so I started building my own furniture by finding like things at the local mill, and built my bed and my couches and everything, and just started kind of like getting trees in. That was my first priority. Like, how much food can I produce on this beautiful, hectare and a half, 2 hectares of land? And then the owners of the property that I think that I'm going to have a job and like help them develop this yoga retreat center, they're like, oh, we put the property on the market. And so I was like, well, that's really inconvenient, because I just moved my life here, and now my daughter, who I saw a lot, is moving to Pennsylvania, which is somewhere that I don't feel like I would want to live. So I'm settled in here, and I'm like, okay, what can I do next? I'm going to start running retreats again. So the pandemic had started to wane, and so I started running a couple retreats, and one of the owners of the land came to one of the retreats, and he was enthusiastic about the vision. So he kind of like was like, okay, I'll tell my partners that they just need to hold off on selling the land for now. And that gave me enough time and another business partner enough time to find enough investment to buy out the partners. So we bought out the 3 partners. We took on all the debt from that property. And then because I had lived here, I knew that there were a couple more contiguous parcels to the main finca that were really important for the stewardship of the watershed as well as the land. So there was a local farmer whose kids had all left and he was aging and didn't want to farm cows anymore. So we negotiated a purchase of his lot. And then there was one other like more gringo man that owned what we call the Goddess Pools, which goes back like a long time, as locals call it, Poza de Diosa. So I knew these two parcels were really important to the overall vision of Holos. So I eventually, like slowly, we got investment to purchase these parcels. I came up with a strategy of pre-selling some lots to people that were really aligned with the vision. And so that was like about 2 years ago. So that's when Holos really grounded. Once we like had the property, we had something to really steward. And then once we had the funds, about a year and a half ago, we started building. Even though we hadn't paid off all the land, it was like, okay, I trust that if we build this, then we'll be able to host retreats here and gain momentum with the whole project. So I'm going to pause there because then it kind of moves into the build, which has a lot of really interesting components, a lot of lessons for people that are going to develop projects like this. But that's the genesis of Holos. It's really like a sparkle of a dream in Stan Groff's eye and his late wife, and then merged with my desire to live in a sustainable community and something that is resilient and can weather the storms of what I still see to be a global system that is on the brink of, you could call it collapse. I think there's actually a lot of nodes of resilience around the world, but economically and socially, and ecologically, I feel like the world is kind of on this brink of like, yeah, there's going to be systems that break and there's going to be other ones that emerge. And I think that what we're building here and the texture and culture of what we're building here is one of those systems that will eventually be resilient. So,
wow, what a story. It's different than what I imagined when I first saw the website. I don't know, year and a half ago, probably.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I kind of had this imagination of some people like Esalen type retreat center people getting together and being like, let's buy this land and do our thing and come in. But it was much more textured than that.
Much more textured.
So,
yeah.
So let me kind of recap for myself to make sure I got the story straight.
Yeah.
So you came here and when you mentioned an early retreat that you did here, that was at Home Farm next door.
Because we didn't own the property, have any stake in the property.
You weren't
but
here.
I knew that this
you were
land
next door.
was important. We were at Home Farm, but we ran the ceremony and we blessed the land with the Bree Elder on this property.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay, and you were just housing people at Home Farm.
Yeah.
Okay, and so at that time, there was another group of investors that had this land that you decided to merge with, and then they ended up backing out, and that's when you found new partners to take it on.
Exactly.
And it sounds like current day Holos occupies how many hectares?
It's basically 84 hectares.
Wow, 84 hectares. And when you say you bought a house here, is that like kind of on what is now Holos, but maybe adjacent to that original property you were looking to? Okay.
Yeah, the original property was 3 large farms, and it had largely been abandoned. Like there was a caretaker and his family; they were cattle farming it, but the owners that wanted to build a yoga retreat center had kind of just like let it go. So in the center of those 3 farms was this little parcel that was carved out like 10 years ago or longer. And that's where my house is. So I knew that was kind of like a keystone of the whole project energetically unlocking. So, yeah.
Okay, great. So give me a little lay of the land. So we're up top here. You've got some glamping tents over here that I know the retreat people stay in when they come here. Yeah. And then later today, I'm going to meet with Shelby in the neighborhood, which is down below, which I don't really even know a lot about yet. Yeah. So I guess I'll learn more about that, maybe a little bit from you if you want to give us a quickie, and then I'll do a video of that later. And then just give it kind of a quick lay of the land. What's the parcels? I know you intend to have a neighborhood of people living here.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So I'll kind of start from the ridge here. So this is what we call La Cresta, or the ridge, and what we call it is base camp. It's like we're at the very beginning of climbing this mountain of building Holos. So this is base camp. And so we have 26 beds, a bathhouse, these really beautiful tents which we call star nests, which we designed with a fabricator in Mexico. And then we've got a little reception area, a kitchen that's like very functional, which was expanded off of an old like little rancho. There was kind of like for the cattle farmers, there was a bathroom which had fallen apart, and just a shade structure. So we rebuilt all that. We brought in the brie to build the thatched roof. A lot of sustainable materials incorporated into there, bamboo and different things. There's a laundry facility. And then there's these two structures, which are really like a sweet and beautiful story. This is the dining hall. That's what we call the air shala. And that's where we do a lot of medicine work and yoga and that kind of thing. There's another small shala below it and a fire pit. But when we purchased the property, there was really nothing up here. There were some things that were dilapidated and falling apart. And so then we built this domed structure by bringing in an architect from Tulum, a designer from Thailand, and a trainer in bamboo construction from Bali and from Bamboo University. So we built this first structure, or the majority of the shala, through basically a work exchange with people that were learning. So we did a workshop, and some people paid full price for the workshop and just came and learned about bamboo construction. Some people, we had a TICO rate, and then some people didn't pay anything. And what we did was like a work exchange. Like, you're going to learn all the techniques, and then give us, I think it was 2 weeks of assistance in building these structures. And those TICOs and otherwise have gone on. A lot of them were like builders or engineers. They've gone on to build projects all over Costa Rica. So I feel like that was at least a very first example of how we want to operate Holos, which is like a giving back, an education, and a reciprocation. So yeah, we built this really beautiful bamboo structure. I was a journeyman carpenter and a home builder and designer. And so this was a really fun education for me in how to work with a new material that is not straight lines and like dug for studs. And so then I learned enough through that building that I was able to design this one and play with the geometry in different ways. And you know, these are a little over a year, about a year and a half old, and they are holding up awesome. And if you treat bamboo really well, then it can last a long time. So these are like 3 different types of bamboo incorporated in. There's like the asper bases, which are like these big elephant feet with the roots still attached, and then the guadua and the philostachys. So this was, I think you can tell, like I got really excited about this part. And like the choosing of materials, there's like these tables which are cenicero, and I would like scout out in the mills where wood was coming from. And in Costa Rica, they're mills, and like the standards of how they cut the wood and where they cut it is really strict now because there was so much deforestation before. So these are sustainably harvested, and we built all the bases, and the stone for the dining hall is local stone that was cut down the road in Perez. And so, yeah, I guess I'm kind of like proud of these spaces, or it's where I get the most joy. Like I love being a facilitator, and sometimes facilitator assist with the facilitation of medicine, but the building and the conceiving of things is really exciting to me. So when I was at Esalen and subsequent other retreat centers, one of the things that I saw lacking was a residential community that could actually like own a stake in the place and live there long term. So that, as well as the importance of a school system, or like at least some rudimentary school facilities for families in the area, and then the farming. So what I started to realize from working at a lot of different retreat centers is there was these components. If I was ever involved in a project as an owner or like in charge of the development, that it would have these different components of conservation, cultivation of food, culture, community, and care. So like healing arts and that kind of thing. So we've incorporated like a lot of that, and well, we've incorporated all of that into the development. So there's a few lots that people are purchasing to build houses on. There's one house up on the ridge that's just about to break ground. There's one house that's built. There's about 4 houses that are getting built this year. There's 35 parcels for people to build homes on.
Okay.
And some of those parcels are where the neighborhood is. So the neighborhood, there's these like nodes or these, this is very wild topography. Like we go from 1,200 feet up here down to like 500 feet at the bottom of the property.
Oh, wow.
So it's very steep, and there's these hills and waterfalls and springs and all of this like varied topography. So there's only like very clear building sites that are on ridges that like you wouldn't have to cut a lot of trees or cut any trees, especially the cattle pastures of these upper areas. They're like really prime for regenerative development.
Right.
And so, yeah, just a little tiny side note. Cattle can be really good for carbon sequestration and food and milk and all these things. And they can actually be really good for the soil in the right topography. But the topography of the Diamante Valley is not one of those topographies. So what happens is these like clay hills that are fairly steep, the cows just kind of make their rounds and eat the grass, and the soil just gets depleted and destroyed the whole time. So we've slowly started moving the cows up the hill, and now they're pretty much out of the property. We still have a couple and some horses, and they've moved on to other places. But what they leave behind is places that don't have any jungle that are pretty easy to build on. And they're also great for place to rebuild soil and to put in fruit forests.
Yep.
So I would say about half of the cattle pastures on the whole property we're letting go back to just jungle. And so if you give it enough years, the soil gets regenerated on its own, and you can add different plants and trees that'll help to fix nitrogen and kind of settle the soil or to help with erosion. And then there's other areas that we have to more actively manage, and those are for fruit forests, and you have to like chop the grass and amend the soil and do all the things. And then we have conservation areas that we're actively trying to regrow particular trees like the mountain almond, and see if we could reintroduce or encourage macaws and different animals. Like I'd really like in a few years, like 5-10 years, to be able to do a macaw recovery program here, and with the great green macaw, which is critically endangered, and they need a particular food source. So we have 100 trees down in the nursery that we'll start to plant this year. So those were all side notes, but the development itself, if you look at it from the air, the top portion is more like the hospitality, the retreat center. Where we are now will be restaurant, spa, like event center. And then the retreat center will move down the ridge, because as more residents come in, as this area gets a little busier, it's harder to hold a really strong field for doing medicine work up here on the ridge. Like we're at the very center of the Diamante Valley, and like a lighthouse, you know, you can see it from the entire region.
You probably hear it too.
Yeah, exactly. So we want to be a little more discreet. We're going to move and build the next temple, which we've designed down the ridge a little bit and a little bit quieter.
Oh, okay, good to know.
So this is all kind of the public access zone. And then you move down the ridge, and there's all these different planteles and kind of like naturally flat zones that people are going to build houses. So there's 35 lots, and those lot owners all share common access and stewardship of a conservation area, which is about a quarter of the property, and it's everything down along the Diamante River. So there's like at very least 50 meters up, but then the conservation zone also goes up into the watershed, into the major creeks that continue to flow and the springs. So that whole conservation area has a couple 3 kilometers of trails that we've put in, and all the residents share that, as well as like our local neighbors. Like we want to be stewards of it in a good way, and so we've been discouraging dogs and like off leashes and that kind of thing. So the conservation area for me is really close to my heart. I've seen a jaguar down there, and like there's a lot of different animals and monkeys, and that I just want to be able to commune with, or I want my kids to be able to commune with 50 years from now.
Yeah.
So we're also hoping to have that conservation area contiguous to other parcels continue all the way up to the base of the falls. So in the long-term strategy, it's like aligning with other neighbors so that we can keep that watershed really good and clean.
Make a biological corridor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Make a biological corridor. So we're working on that. So we've got the conservation zone, the community, which is all of these individual lots. We've got a farm worker housing zone that is the Baruka people mostly that work for us. So we work a lot with the Baruka tribe. They were actually the last stewards of this area. So the Bree probably moved through as trade routes, but based on the archaeology that I've seen in the area, this was likely Baruka. And then before that, a group called the Chorotega. And the Chorotega originally came from Mexico. I could tell a really epic story about that and like the intergenerational healing that a Maracame did here. But then we move a little higher up the hill and there's a whole community zone. So that parcel is co-stewarded by the community. It's got a workshop, 2 large greenhouses, an event center, trapiche where they crush sugarcane. And that's like next to the little event center because the local folks love to, that's like where they like to party, is like crush sugarcane and enjoy a meal together.
So there's this other event center that exists that the Baruka people and whatever other locals are currently actively using.
Anybody can use, yeah.
Okay.
We've got a couple tents next to it or in it for volunteers, but people gather there and we're just starting to activate that. It's a big, it's a 50-foot geodesic dome. And so we could go down there if you'd like. And then there's a site that we've designated for a community center and a school, and it's really beautifully designed bamboo structure for the community center. And then there's actually a Burning Man art installation that is like a massive solar temple that with solar panels on it, and they would like to partner with us on finding a site for it. So we may have that be the phase 1 of the school down there. So there's this whole like cultural experiment that I'm engaged with of, okay, here's this area available to the community to do what it wants, and we build the initial infrastructure and the compost center and the chicken coops and all of that, and then the hope is that the community stewards it. So that's in terms of like the overview of what's happening here, the lay of the land. So it's, conservation, cultivation of food. We've got a couple farms, the community, and then this area up here, which we do, cultural and healing work.
Okay. So when you talk about 35 lots, those are, I imagine, those are one piece. And then you talk about this area where there's some of the Baruka people currently living down there on the land. And how many people are there now? And is this like a long-term plan to allocate this area for long-term use of some quantity of people?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Right now, I believe there's 9 people living there. Then we've got a couple other staff houses, and there's 2 people living at the workshop. But it just gives them a place to live. And occasionally they'll go back to their farms in Baruka or go check on family. But they're really happy down there, so we'll keep evolving it. There's an old house that was abandoned that we renovated, and that became the common house. And then some of the folks are in tents, some are in bedrooms, and it's like a little bit more secluded and in the jungle, and that's where they want to be, and they're really happy there. We used to rent houses in the San Salvador area, and it's just much better to have people be able to walk to work or be close to the property.
Yeah. So you're talking about water being really important for you, and the quality and quantity of the water bordering the property here was a big piece. And obviously that water is used by the whole region here and the Pueblo of San Salvador and all of that. And then you've got your, beyond the Baruka that you said were caretaking this and stewarding this land before. We've got the Costa Rican population of San Salvador that's been here for generations as well. What is your relationship with the kind of outside of the Holos community? Like, tell me a little bit about your interaction with the Ticos and the relationship with the water usage and all of that.
Yeah. It's interesting and complex. So I told you about my original intention of coming here during the pandemic and thinking that, okay, I can really get to know the community. But in the course of 3 months, you can't really get to know your neighbors. Like I got to know a few people really well, especially our caretaker and that family line, and Marina, the grandma of the neighborhood, and most of the neighbors that are really adjacent. But one of the things that's been really humbling is looking at the impact that we have just in terms of perception on the broader San Salvador community. So like what we're doing is actually, from my perspective, pretty humble and balanced with everything. Like the use of the land, we're using it less intensively than the majority of San Salvador as far as the like Tico population.
Can you describe what you mean by that?
Yeah, just the density in terms of like how many houses and how many people in a given amount of space. Mm-hmm. So like our parcels are really large. We have this whole conservation zone, the farm zone. So even though we're like right here on the edge of San Salvador, like we're basically the northwest corner of San Salvador, the density of development is lesser than like what you can see there on the ridge, like the neighborhood there. So we're trying to be really sensitive to like not having too big of an impact, or to be like in balance with the use and development of the land around us. And the water is one of the things where it became an interesting issue. It's like any development needs an ASADA like sign off and to be incorporated into the ASADA. So
just real quick for listeners who don't know what ASADA is, it's the local water committee
authority. Yeah. So I spent a lot of conversations with the ASADA. We originally had it signed off by one board, and we were like, okay, so we did the subdivision, and then we got to the point of we had the whole water system, $200,000 installed in the whole development inside of our property. Then we go to the ASADA to hook up, and then they were like, oh, well, now we're a new board, and even though you have this letter, like we don't think that there's enough water in the springs that we have. So I went up and hiked to the springs with the president of the ASADA, of the Water Authority, looked at the spring. We looked at another spring. We came up with a strategy. Okay, well, maybe we develop this second spring, upgrade the whole town's water system, including new tanks and 4-inch lines. And then they were like, okay, well, let's do that. So then we're about to pull the trigger on that, and they were like, no. So we have had like these water setbacks a number of times, while we have on the property a few massive springs that are bigger than the whole town's spring system. And we're hesitant to develop them because then you end up, the spring gets owned by a higher authority, whether it's the ASADA or the AYA. So we definitely have contemplated that. Either way, we need a water authority to sign off. And what we decided, and we're actually starting hopefully next week or in 2 weeks, is to drill wells at the top of the property that would just be like within our watershed. So we can like work on the percolation of the soil and make sure that the water in the springs are really healthy. So that's, and then we'll have a closed water system here.
So that'll remove your draw from the San Salvador.
So we won't
ASADA.
have impact on them,
Okay.
and that issue will be mitigated. And then we can look at a lot of other ways that we can contribute to the community. We've built cabezales, like paid for the materials to.
What's cabezale?
Oh yeah, sorry, I've been here long enough that I'm just using.
Yeah. I got to think in the mind of my listeners all the time.
Of course, so, so like the gutter systems for the water. So water's the big thing here, not just drinking water, but we have massive storms and can get 5+ inches of rain a day, you know? Mm-hmm. So when that happens, the waterways fill up massively, including the river. But around houses and roads, if you don't mitigate the water well, then it just washes out whole sections of road. So we've helped with the San Salvador sewer projects or water gutter projects. And then we're looking at other ways. So like one of the things that people are most concerned about every year, and that they kind of have petitions for money, is the road system. And like I said earlier, I was a planning commissioner for a city of 150 in Alaska. I've done residential developments. I've like navigated this before, but the Costa Rican tax system and the way that that tax money trickles down into actual like neighborhood projects is pretty archaic. And so we have a tax base that like all the landowners pay to the municipality, and then they allocate that to different projects. But then, like as an example, it moves very slowly, and there's been a allocation of money to pave a couple kilometers of the road from Tinamaste to San Salvador for like 5 years, and it hasn't happened. So what I really hope in one way that Holos and myself can contribute is to just more formalize how some of these systems work, of like how the neighborhood takes care of each other. So yeah, I think there's a lot of ways that in the long term will end up benefiting the local community. And I feel like I have really good relations with everybody that I see and that I interact with. But then there's these little grumbles and things that I hear in the background. So one of the things that I think we could improve, or that I want to get really curious about, is ways that we can have community events so that people don't have like the projection of the unknown onto what Holos is. You know, it's like I've heard some crazy stories of what people think that we're up to over here. And it's kind of like your idea of like, oh, maybe a group of people that had from Esalen had some money, bought this land. It's like, it's been a lot more of a hero's journey. And so one of the things that we're always like working with is people's projections. And the only way to help shift those is really communication and exposure. And when I'm so deep in the doing and management of people and projects, I forget like to open those doors and to have those dialogues. So that's really like something I want to concentrate on in the next 6 months, is just better relations with our local community.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, for me, it's a huge passion of mine, is building these cultural bridges. And I know, yeah, it is very easy when you're at the head of a project to like just be like, oh my God, there's so much I got to keep in the balls in the air, and there's no shortage of balls that people wish you could also keep in the air, right? Yeah. And because they don't see all the other things that you're doing. And yeah, one of the most obvious ones as foreigners in this country is in relating with the people who've been here for generations, that we're sharing resources with, like the road, like the water. Mm-hmm. So I think the conversations like this hopefully are very helpful for people, and I'm grateful to hear that you've got more desire to be inclusive, and where I was going with this is I remember when I had my own project for a dozen years, and we had permaculture design courses and little festivals and stuff. And to do any of these, we had our volunteer crew. And even in that time, or the students, and whenever we have a group of people that are, not invested members, however long they're interacting with the place, even, almost more so, the more people interact with the place, but they're not really part of the inner circle of decision making and so forth, this group mind can form. And I found, for instance, we had our first permaculture design course in our place. We did not start with this kind of budget. Everything was like really roots, hand built, rustic, and substandard. But we had heart, and we were doing it, and we were feeding people well and all of this. And yet, here was me and my now ex-wife and our kids and our bubble, and then these teachers and us trying to facilitate all of it and make it happen. And we failed to interact with these students that were here for a couple weeks. Mm-hmm. Easy thing to pass on. The teachers got it. Yeah. We hired these teachers to come in and teach the course. They got this. We're going to just manage the things that need to be taken care of. And at the end of the course, we had a really heavy blow come to us, because there were some small circumstances, complete misunderstandings, where a couple of students, they asked for something in the midst of me like holding the baby in one arm and cooking dinner for 14 people, and And I was just like, I just didn't have time to answer him the way that he wanted to be answered, and felt like he needed to be answered. And that began a feeling of unwelcome from him. It wasn't a genuine expression of unwelcome.
Right.
It was just he approached me in a moment that I just didn't have the bandwidth.
Yeah.
The fire was on the stove.
Yeah.
And while if he came back an hour later, I would have had a much more contemplative and welcoming response for him. That never happened. He just kind of hid away. And I, in my early day lack of wisdom, didn't think to follow up. Mm-hmm. And then another week and some went by. Meanwhile, something else little happened and somebody else was like not happy with their accommodation. And this group mine, and we found out at the end that there was this whole group of disgruntled students over really little things that they were like taking personally and creating stigmas. And they formed a group mind of how unconnected the owners of the property were. And, well, honestly, they were right. We weren't connecting with them.
Yeah.
We were good people doing good stuff, trying our best to make their experience as positive as functional as possible.
Yeah, but you can only do so much. Yeah.
Right. Well, we could have connected.
Yeah.
And after that experience, we made sure that whenever we had a group, we just scheduled group meetings.
Yeah.
Hey, guys, hope you're having a great time. We're going to
have
come
a check-in.
together once a week. We're here for 2 weeks. We're going to have 2 meetings while you're here to just check in and see what's not being talked about.
Yeah.
Let's hear it. Let it to. Okay, we're this is the time. Now we're available to hear it.
Yeah.
And so we designed that into the retreats and into the workshops. And that made an enormous difference. And but it is very easy to not do that, not out of any malice, but just out of overwhelm or ignorance.
Yeah.
Right. And so I can see, this project's on a much grander level, larger time spans, larger quantity of people involved, larger budgets involved. And in those days, we weren't interacting very much with our Pueblo, but I don't know what the Pueblo's group mind was at the time. We had stinky people on the bus and stuff like that. We had the stigmas growing in the Pueblo as well. These days, my interest in being involved with the development associations of the Pueblo is a different reality than it was back then. Yeah. But, that is, I think, it's really a critical thing, I think, that I advise. I do consulting work for other landowning entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I, really impose on them is the importance of taking the time to connect with the Pueblo. Mm-hmm. And if they're having groups, connect with their visitors, because that king on the hill paradigm that, the owners or stewards of a project can often get pinned with isn't always unfair.
Yeah.
It's not entirely inaccurate either. Mm-hmm. And it's mitigatable through practice, through intention. Yeah. And, I was part of, you talking about the road project. I headed up the fundraiser last year that raised, $20,000 to help the road after 2 years of disrepair. Yeah. And, it was a huge move because I was part of the Diamante Bridge Collective. And here's this whole association of foreigners down here that wants to do all this good stuff for the community and create these circles of influence. And I came in and I was excited about it. And then we were wanted to survey people and learn what membership would mean. And I was like, hey, is anyone talking to the Ticos that are here? Is anyone active in the development association? And they were like, what's that? Yeah. I was like, who do you guys think fixes the roads? Yeah. And takes care of the water? Well, the Muni. No, the Muni does not take care of the roads without the local committee making them do it and providing the money to put the rocks in the trucks that the muni provides. They had no idea. So I went to the association meeting, which turned out to be the first one in a couple of years that they had, and found out that they were in an imperative situation. And so the work I did to help gather, the community together to put money down, especially the newer developments that have the big trucks running through here, bringing all their materials back and forth that are one of the major impacts on the road, kicked down. And after that, boy, when I went to the final accounting meeting with the association, the road committee, they were more than excited to share our survey through their channels with the local Tico neighbors.
Amazing.
And, that type of curiosity that started and it wasn't hard to gather people. People knew they needed to throw down for the road once they realized that their neighbors had been doing it for all this time they've been doing it. They're like, oh, shoot, no, okay, I'll throw down. This being a bridge of communication was tremendously impactful, not just on the logistics of the road repair, but on the community relations. And there's been such a long history in this valley of foreigners coming in and building their dream project without connecting with the locals, that just like you're saying, there's a disconnect, that there's this group mind, there's this stories that, like I had, of not knowing the origin of the place or the intention of the place. Without this communication, this intentional education and connection, the many of the Costa Ricans in this region have a blanket attitude of foreigners in general, and there is such a wide spectrum of foreigners. You talk about Chris in the Living Library. What a humble human being. I've worked with Chris he's in other places, and seeing him and being with him, and he's just such an of the earth, connected, loving, wants to he's someone that the neighbors have learned to appreciate. Those that he hasn't connected with can still see that man and just project their mentality on him, not knowing what he's involved with. So I think that anything that you can do, or anybody else listening to this that has a project in this country that's bringing in curiosities to the locals, like, don't let it go very long. It's damaging. It's really a disservice to the region. As much as we want to do these ecological projects, it's a disservice to the humans in the region to not be connected. Invite them in, give them a tour, tell them the story you told me, and because that grows alliances. And you've got this, Baruka population down here, but, honestly, and, we don't want to put too many isolating labels on groups of people, but they're a small population, and they're not necessarily interacting enough with the Tico population to share the stories that they've learned from you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they have a lot of gifts to give in terms of knowledge of the plants and the jungle plants that have a lot of healing qualities, some of those traditions that a few like grandmas in the neighborhood that I know or have seen hold some of that, and their art, and they're a really beautiful culture that has something to offer. And then in terms of the local Pueblo, I'm just really inspired by your like attitude, and also like little bits of reframing that I'm doing internally around my story of not having enough time, or like being overwhelmed and not making the effort. There's some really particular initiatives that have been on my mind for a long time. We're right next to the San Salvador school, and it would be so easy for the kids to come down and have like once a month, like a tour of the farm and learn about soil health. And like, I feel like part of why it hasn't happened is we haven't quite been ready. Like now we're just getting good production out of our greenhouses, and there's ways that it would be really easy for them to just come. And my hope is that when we have this school here, which will be more of a private school or funded by the parents, and then there will be some subsidized spaces, but to have that really open channel between these two schools that are going to be right next to each other. So it's like all those things that are in my mind and are on the to-do list there's ones that I feel like I just need to elevate and have those practices like you're describing to bridge the gap. Whether it's internally with our own team, which we have processes that we go through on a regular basis and facilitators that help us work through issues, but or just give a safe space for things to be spoken. But then on our community relations with the Pueblo, I feel like we still have a long ways to go. Our new general manager, he's been here like maybe 6 months now. He's Tico and he's worked in hospitality and he's helping build that bridge just where there's a language barrier for me. And that's the other like big thing that I would encourage to any listener is like learn the Spanish. And so you're
top of the list,
yeah,
man. Top of
you know,
the
you're
list.
you're like re-encouraging me like, okay, these community initiatives and ways of bridging, just have that happen, find the time for it. I think we're in a period right now with Holos where we're in the real contemplation of how does it want to manifest itself? How much energy do we put into retreats? We haven't been making enough money on the retreats to cover the overhead of the whole farm and everything, and even our staff. So we're in this like really humble moment right now where it's like, okay, you know, this may not be the time that we put a lot of energy into our programming that is like bringing people in and doing these retreats, because that may just not be what wants to happen right now. Maybe we focus on the roots and community relations and the development of the neighborhood. And so that's really what we're thinking. And that will give me more time to learn more vocabulary and to interact more with the local community. So yeah, I feel like this is really a useful conversation for me just in assessing my priorities. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, brother. Yeah, because you have a tremendous amount of potential support surrounding you that right now is to some degrees actually existing in a state of feeling alienated. And the only thing missing there is communication.
Invitation.
Yeah. And, you know, with, you know, I know with where I'm living now up in the Chiripo side, there's a couple of, it's a little bit more developed than the Diamante Valley in that there's some actual like businesses that are cafes, that are event centers, that have their gathering spots more formally for the community, where people can just come and teach a yoga class or some, like I'm going to start doing entrepreneur round circles in the coming weeks. And when you look at the flyers, you know, it's becoming more and more common to have, you know, a sliding scale maybe for people, but then Tico's by donation.
Yeah.
You know, or significantly like half price or whatever. And just like have that be the standard, because honestly, you know, we're here paying the local people far less than we would probably pay the contractor that we fly in from out of the country. So we're, you know, and not to fault anybody, but we, you know, many foreigners are here actively participating in an economic division by taking advantage of the low labor costs. So I think to at least acknowledge and be honest with that, and to do what we can to make sure that we're paying at the top of rate and paying their insurance and taking care of whatever other bonuses and so forth that we can offer them, to invite them in at whatever they can pay, you know, and just be like, hey, we got room. Come on in. If you feel called to be part of our craziness, our differentness, our thing that your family thinks is of the devil or whatever else, like, nah, you want to be part of this? You like it? Come on up. Pay what you can.
Totally.
You know, come on up.
We've done a bit of that, especially like with our local, like with our crew and medicine work. Like we've had Maracames come from Mexico, and we've had really beautiful experiences of that cultural exchange. And it's something that I want to explore more as we pivot into running less retreats and mostly having this as like a venue that people could buy out. I want to do that, like figure out who wants to use the space, how to make it more inclusive. And
Yeah, those are great directives.
Yeah, and even in your network, if you know somebody that would be interested in helping to run that kind of like a coordinator, we've got a bunch of people that we're interviewing. But that's another thing for like the listeners, I guess, and people that are interested in building a community or development anywhere, whether it's Costa Rica or any other remote place. Like the alchemy of the team and like understanding who people are before you really like bring them in and hire them and all of that feels really important. It's like been one of the big learning lessons for me. I've managed other teams. I've mostly been part of organizations that already had a lot of stature or were established. And like when you need to be scrappy and nimble and put together like everything that we're talking about, it's so important to make sure your team is the right people.
Yeah, it's actually something else that I wanted to bring up, and we're coming to an hour here, but this is juicy. I'm really there's a piece I wanted to ask you about team and resources too. Like a lot of the people that I work with as a consultant, like they're I think one of probably top of the list things are people needing to figure out, how do I find my team, because what I want to do is bigger than me.
Yeah.
And how do I get the resources? And you have come from a roots foundation of borrowing money from your folks to build your house to acquiring both resources and a team to do this massive project. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about either what you've done to accomplish that, and or what you would advise other people that are like, they have a great dream and they need extra people and resources to make it happen? What's the key there?
It's a really good question. I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that. I mean, yes, on the surface, it's like, okay, we've manifest a lot and it's good to hear that reflection, or I don't even really like the word manifest. We've built a lot and we've assembled a lot and we've gotten a lot of amazing support. And a big part of that was there was like a lot of enthusiasm for the psychedelic revolution. And so we caught the wind of that. That's kind of waning at the moment as companies go under. We won't end up being one of those because we've been smart and like we didn't blow our money on admin. We like built enduring things. But I think it was like, it took a long time. So in my story, those first couple of years of just like gaining interest, it was like a lot of sitting in bed, reaching out to people, crafting the vision, writing the pitch decks with no momentum, trying out teams like, hey, can we raise money together? Not being able to. I mean, it's been like really humbling, and the only common denominator is me. So I've been like looking a lot at my inabilities and also shortcomings, and like, why have team members not worked out? And it's been a very like humbling process. So I think that different people will show up in the path if you ask really clearly to your community or to the like. There's channels too, like LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and all of those things, but identify what your strengths are, find what your needs are, and then really make a humble ask out to the broader community. And sometimes those seeds take a while to germinate and to find the right teammates. But I've been blessed with some really great people and partners that have carried different pieces of the ball for the moment that they needed to. And sometimes those needs change. I have amazing people right now that I would love to have stay on. But it's likely that we need to like take a pause until we're at a stage where we can really afford the salaries that they want. Or it's like, we don't have enough programming and a cadence of people coming because we're in this remote place, and it's just the nature of the economy right now too. Yeah. To find that support. And then as far as being like adaptive and figuring out how to finance a project like this, it's also like can be a real journey. Finding the right aligned investors or family members or whatever it is, being smart with those resources. And then in Costa Rica, I can't just go like, when I helped rebuild Esalen, it was like we could go ask for a $10 million loan from like a foundation or from a bank that works with nonprofits. for this project, like getting financing from a bank in Costa Rica is really challenging. Getting financing from a bank in the US for a foreign project is really challenging. Hard money loans are at a percentage rate that, like, unless you use that money quickly and have it start to generate revenue, then you can lose the project through the interest rates. So like, I'm always tooling all these pieces, and we just happen to have some really amazing supporters. We have like 12 investors that are largely hands off that really believe in us, you know? And so I'm really grateful to each and every one of them, whether it was a small check or a really large check that helped us get to this stage. But then it's like, you have to be a good steward with the resources that you have. And so like, I'm being honed, you know, it's like, we call this the Diamante Valley because of the 600-foot waterfall called the Diamante Falls. And, you know, the way that diamonds are formed is heat and pressure. And we're like at the center of this mandala. Like, you look around and it's like, okay, mountains, 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 mountains. And then there's this little point, and you can see it from Platanillo to everywhere. And it's like, oh, there's Holos. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, so we get to be the center of the pressure cooker. And that's how my life has felt a little bit, and it's been crushing. So then, like, what's left after you're completely crushed and is like the core of the diamond, which is like indestructible, but I'm still in the pressure cooker.
Yeah. I imagine, you know, listening to your story, the first thing that you said when you were responding to me was kind of that it all started with you and you being in bed writing these pitch decks and stuff. And I mean, when I've responded to people trying to like really vision, because I also did not succeed in those early days to acquire the team or the funds that we needed to complete the vision that we had. You know, at this point, I've been really adamant about getting super descriptive and super clear and super specific, and like really being able to communicate the plan and what the money's going to get used for and what you need and what kind of people with what talents you need, and like really get hyper specific about what you're asking for before asking. Do you feel like that was really part of your process, or did you have kind of a looser vision and just kind of got lucky that people were...
We had really specific asks when we started asking for resources, and there's been times where we've had really specific asks for people and like human resources. One of our best situations was, it was like a year and a half ago. We had a staff week. There was a woman interested in what we were doing. Her therapist introduced her to us because she was like, oh, there was somebody from corporate America that was like finance person. And so she came in and I was like, well, we don't really have the funds to hire you in the like short term. But I really think that you should be part of the team, and we do need somebody to do accounting, finance, all of these things. Then like a couple weeks later, she was like, I quit my job. I'm coming to work for you. And so she came, and I was like, okay, we're going to figure this out and pay you, and you can like, you'll get equity in this way and that way. And she's turned out to be the backbone of the company and been my right-hand person. Like, I would not be as far along as I am without her. So, you know, sometimes you just have to listen, and that tenacity of spirit that some people like, that's what I'm looking for right now in anybody else that's on the team. It's like, do they have the tenacity of spirit of like, okay, we're going to keep this ship sailing, you know?
Yeah. No, that quality is absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
That perseverance, that, cause there's always going to be downs, and the winner is the one who gets back up.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the jungle's its own thing, you know? Like I said, I grew up in the middle of Alaska. The extremes there are temperature and light. And so that's what you're mitigating throughout the year. It's like no sunlight, 24 hours of sunlight, 60 below zero, 85 above zero. The seasons are very extreme. Here, the extremes are rain. It's dry for a few months, and then it's just like torrential rain for a few months during the year. And the life force. The life force here is like so strong, and so you're always like working with that. And that can be its own kind of exhausting, like the amount of time and resources it takes for us to upkeep the land and like prepare fruit forests or keep those young fruit trees alive because the jungle is just ready to come back and eat everything. I feel like that's a part of the pressure cooker or whatever it is. It's part of the tending. It's like, as humans in this ecosystem particularly, you need to like listen in a different way and figure out like permaculture principles of like, okay, there's a good amount of inputs, and then eventually it starts to be more of a easeful flow and efficient. And so I had a teacher or somebody that I really studied with, and it was about language and how language emerges from landscape. And so like language and how we relate to a landscape is culturally like unique. And so we come with this like Western vernacular and words and ways of relating to things, which is probably a lot more like objectifying nature. And so I think what I'm finding is like this particular ecosystem, it requires a lot of listening to do things well. A lot of listening to the way the water flows when the storms come, and like mitigating for that. And this particular teacher of mine, he said in some text that it takes about 3 years for your nervous system to really attune to a place, and that's when you can really start to be a conspirator or like work with a landscape. So I think I'm on that cusp. I've been here 3 years now, and there's like I get to come into another level of listening where maybe I wasn't quite as attuned when I started the project, but still we've done a good job. The intentions were there. We've like gotten to a stage where we haven't created irreparable harm with the local community, the land, or anything, but it's like the learning continues. And so I'm excited for that. And I guess that would be one encouragement to anybody wanting to embark on this, is like, take as much time as you have the liberty to listen, to get the right support, and to be adapting to what you hear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's crucial advice, and one that even the permaculturists I know in this area, or in general, as much as observe is the first principle. Mm-hmm. It's so hard when you have ambition and you have the resources and the feeling that it's good to just get started.
Yeah.
And that works sometimes, and it works to degrees. And anybody who's doing it for long enough will tell you, man, I wish I would have listened more. I wish I would have observed longer. Yeah. I personally wish we would have spent more than 3 months looking for a property before we bought one. I wish we would have rented for a year before buying a property. Mm-hmm. We would have found our co-creators instead of buying our own thing and just going for it, winging it. Yeah. Anybody who finds that hard, I challenge them to go into that hardness and be impatient without starting, and sit in that impatience long enough to understand that it's okay to feel impatient. Yeah. It's okay to feel ready and not get started yet, because there's another wisdom that says, no, take your time. You definitely don't know everything yet. Yeah. Yeah. All right, buddy. This has been an awesome interview. Thank you so much. Yeah. How can people be involved with Holos on any level? What's your invitation? Well, this epic venue is like available for rent at any time, or whenever it's available. People are welcome to rent it. I would love to see more community events happening here. Like Stan Groff's brother is going to be here this week, Paul, and so we'll do some like community dinners, and we have beautiful events, and people rent the venue or collaborate to do ecstatic dances and that kind of thing. But we're really like wanting this to be a sanctuary and a sacred place. So anybody that wants to come do sacred work is welcome to reach out to us. And then we've started working on a volunteer program. We've got a volunteer or two right now. And so there's ways that we're coming into planting season. And if people wanted to learn about permaculture, we have great teachers that come through and trainings that we do. So
people that want to come volunteer and just feel what we're doing. That's a great way. And then we have a couple lots left, but I agree, like what you said, we haven't put out like we haven't tried to market this, we're really like, we have an application process and we're really trying to build long-term community and culture that's cohesive. So, yeah, I mean, people are welcome to apply to live here at some point as well and build. But I really liked your suggestion of like, come rent, feel it out. Some of our residents have done that and just live in the neighborhood. And yeah, I think those are some great ways to come play.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do people find you online?
Yeah, holos.global is our website. We also have the same holos.global as an Instagram. And there's a way to reach out through the website.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super. I think that is the end of our call here, our visit. I'm going to close this part of the interview, and then we're going to take the camera for a walk.
Perfect.
We're going to go visit some of these cool structures and gardens and things you built.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ian-Michael.